Hi, welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Norman. We are lucky enough this week to have with us renowned sailor Tim Prophit, who was a former Commodore at Bayview. And so first of all, Tim, welcome to the show. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
We're in a kind of in a peril now. Your boat is in the water, I think, at this point, right? But I think you're one of the few. Is that fair?
Correct. I was uncharacteristically ready to go early on and got in before the quarantine order came down.
You know, easiest thing to do with these interviews is to start from scratch. So I know you went to Wayne State. You're a Grosse Pointe South guy.
Correct.
And you were I think a manufacturer's rep for most of your career. Is that a?
Yeah, I left General Motors when I learned that I was not suitable for corporate life, and got in the manufacturer's rep arena, and I'm still doing some of that and various other sales-related activities.
Now, you came to sailing a bit late, and I say late. Most of the guys in our area grew up, you all came through junior programs. You didn't kind of come to sailing until your early 20s. Is that right?
Yeah, I think 21 or 23 or something like that. I took an adult learn to sail class at the Detroit Yacht Club, which they taught then and still teach today on their fleet of Flying Scots.
From starting in your 20s and end up as Commodore Bayview, that's not a typical route. Is that fair?
I don't know what is typical, but I mean, I didn't grow up in a sailing family. I didn't take junior sailing, and through the adult learn to sail class, they were very aggressive about introducing us and encouraging us to race. Which, quite frankly, the first time I raced, I thought was kind of stupid, but it turns out I like it very much, and here I am today. So I'm grateful that they were that aggressive in forcing us to race.
The follow-up question is why did you think it was stupid? First time.
I was into motorcycles and demo derby and drag racing and skydiving and fast things, and I can tell you exactly how I got into racing. Okay. There was an instructor there by the name of Randy Burke, and he was trying to encourage me to race, and I was poo-pooing the idea. He said, "Tim, look at it like this. What if you're out sailing with a cute girl and you run out of beer?" And I'm thinking to myself, well, that'd be a disaster. He says, well, if you race, you'll know how to sail back to shore quicker to get more beer faster. I'm thinking, well, that makes perfect sense. Well, that's how I started racing. And the first race I did, it was all my fellow students in the adult learn to sail class. So there was no, everybody had the same level of experience or the same lack of experience. And somehow, one way or another, I won that race. I go, wow, cool. I'm an athlete. I can drink and smoke cigarettes and be an athlete. So there you have it.
What hooked you? What do you remember that moment when it was sort of like, God, this is a lifelong avocation?
I don't know that I remember a specific moment, but I know that I gradually came to learn that sailing is physical. It's mental preparation. It's boat preparation. There's a lot of elements that come into play in order for one to have a successful sailboat race. And, it's teamwork, and it's all the disciplines that need to come together to make it work. And it just interests me, and I find it very gratifying. And I've met a lot of really cool people along the way, and I couldn't be involved in a better sport.
I had the good luck this past Monday to interview Dennis Conner, and we did an audio interview. One of the questions I always ask when I'm interviewing is, what hooked you? Some people have a very acute memory of when that specific moment is, and some people don't. And I asked him that question, and the first thing out of his mouth was, he says, "I hate sailing." Now, this is Dennis Conner saying, "I hate sailing." And then there's this sort of 1, 2, 3, hit the cymbal. He says, "But boy, did I love to race." And he said, "I have no interest in cruising because it just wasn't enough adrenaline." He says, "For me to get in the boat, and he's 77, and for him to get in the boat and just go out and and sail wasn't something that was interesting to him, which maybe is not that far away from a lot of people feel.
Yeah, I recognize and understand that sentiment quite well. Until very recently, I thought time spent on a sailboat that wasn't racing, practicing the race, or transporting the boat from where you were to where the race was a waste of time. And as I've gotten older, I've decided that I just like sailing in general. I prefer racing, but the current boat I have, I actually bought about 10, 11 years ago when my daughter was younger, for the purpose of doing the Mackinac race, not really caring how we did, but taking her cruising in the North Channel. And that first year that I had the boat, we did Mackinac. We ended up, I think, 7th or 10th or something like that. I didn't like that at all. So came back, we did the North Channel cruise. It was wonderful. In fact, one of your former guests, Todd Jones, and I did what we called the daddy-daughter cruise. He took his daughter, I took my daughter, and it was quite the trip. But I didn't like that deep finish in the results. So following winter, I redid the bottom, upgraded the sails, and we came back and won the following year, and that made it a lot better.
Would your friends know you as being a pretty competitive spirit?
Yeah.
I think so. If you got to win at cards, that kind of thing, if you're playing tiddlywinks, you're still going to win. Is that kind of the point?
I play euchre, and some have described me as turning euchre into a contact sport.
Okay, I like the analogy. Having come late to the sport and kind of jumping into racing where maybe cruising wasn't, sort of as a big an option. Any mentors? I mean, who helped you along the way early and thoughts? And
pretty much everybody I met was a mentor. One of the things about sailing is there's always people willing to help somebody get better, answer your question. The people at Detroit Yacht Club and the adult learner sail class there, they were very helpful. They did a lot of encouraging, but they were also a bit provincial in that, flying Scotch is the greatest thing in the world. Don't waste your time on other stuff, blah, blah, blah. And not everybody, but that was a little bit of the attitude that was there. So, after people figured out that, hey, there's a young guy that sails, I get invited on other boats to go out and crew, because just like today, it's not always easy to find crew. And then I ended up moving over to Bayview a couple years later after I bought my first sailboat, for the simple reason that I really wasn't interested in the whole package that the Detroit Yacht Club offered. I didn't care about swimming pools and fine dining and all that stuff. Great club. I'm forever grateful that I learned to sail there, but all I wanted to do was race sailboats. So I ended up at Bayview, and there's so much sailing talent concentrated there. You can walk into the bar and find a national champion winner, or an Olympic contender, or America's Cup sailor, and so that over time you get to know these guys, and you ask them to come out with you, or maybe they ask you to sail with them on their boat. And so it's back then it was a vertical learning curve, and even today it's a pretty steep curve, because there's always something new to learn. There's always somebody who's doing something a little different that might be better, it might be faster. And a lot of mentors. I don't want to, if I name one, then I've offended all the people I left out. So pretty much 90% of the people I've met in sailing are mentors.
Having moved to Crescent 3 years ago, I've sailed my whole life, and from that perspective, it had a good time. But I thought I was a halfway decent sailor until I go to Crescent, and I realized that I'm the worst. If there was a ranking of sailors in DRYA, if there was 100, I'd be 101. There is so much talent and so much ability. It's scary sometimes. And doing this show, you're starting to kind of find out just how much talent's here. And then as I've had a chance to talk to some sort of national level kind of guys like Peter Eisler and Gary Jobson, who spent a lot of time here and sailed a lot of the freshwater events, they hold the Great Lakes sailors in great esteem, because there are some real serious folks that can sail here. I think that's something that gets lost in translation, unless you're in this real small community that we call sail racing. And I'm not sure that word gets out as much as it should.
Well, I think, there is a lot of talent right here in Lake St. Clair, and there's, considerable talent in the rest of the Great Lakes as well. And, the guys have been at this for a while. People know who people are. It gets out, but it's a small community, and we're pretty specialized. So, people who are in the know, I guess would be the way to put that.
Yeah. Now, You have a 40-footer named Fast Tango, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, correct.
One of the hallmarks that we've had a chance to talk a little bit is one of the hallmarks I think that you kind of bring to the table for this discussion is that you're a real do-it-yourselfer kind of guy, and I've heard from more than once if your boat's on the hard, there's something being taken apart or something being fixed. And I don't think that's untrue of anybody else, but I think you've had, by your own admission, bought a boat that I think is 40 years old, and maybe talk a little bit about if you started late, did you have that kind of knowledge, and are you mechanical? And I say that because I don't do a lot of mechanical work on my own boat because I can't. But
again, it's like anything else, it's kind of acquired over time talent. So I've owned 3 sailboats, all named Fast Tango. The first one, I want to say back in the early 90s, ran it down pretty hard, had some keel damage, and got some insurance money to fix it. And Kevin Thompson was the guy I hired to fix it. And part of the deal is I had to help him do the work, and in that process, I learned quite a bit. So I learned from him. I remember the first time we found a void in the deck, and I remember Rick Smith taught me how to vacuum bag. Then over the years, different people have taught me different things, and one of the consequences of being super competitive is sometimes you push the boat a little too hard, and sometimes you break stuff. And when I got the NA40, I think it was like 32 years old, 31 years old, and my intention was to sail it and just not do anything. It was just just leave it be and do the Mackinac, do the North Channel, and so on and so forth. So and that's, I said that, but that's not really my nature. So after longboarding the entire bottom and making it perfect, we went out and sailed, and then what did we break? You broke various things here and there and fixed that, but probably the major thing that kind of got this whole multi-year structural rebuild going was the 2011 Chicago Mackinac. That was the one with the big storm, with the wing nuts tragedy and so on and so forth. And anyway, we were over on our side for 12 minutes under a microburst that recorded wind speeds of 105 knots. Some people have said that's BS. You didn't really have that. All I can tell is that one of my crew, Peter Wensler, took the U.S. sailing report done by Mark Thornton and laid our track over his radar. And we were under the big maroon, purpley red spot that said 105 knots. So I'm pretty sure we were in there. But after all that was over, we had a situation where we discovered 4 broken stringers. And anywhere down below you were, if you walked towards the mast, you were going downhill. So when we got into it, one of the guys that sails with me, a guy by the name of Brett Zimmerman, he owned the only Sawzall amongst the crew at the time, and so he was tasked with cutting out the 4 stringers. So, and there was 8 stringers exposed by the floorboards would be moved. So I get a phone call, and he says, "Hey, Timmy, you're replacing all the stringers." I said, "Why is that?" He goes, "I just cut them all out. They were all wet." So that's what. So one of my other crews, an attorney, he had a client who was building a boat, in a warehouse in Livonia, and we had access to his shop and his vacuum bagging equipment and all sorts of woodworking tools. I had the guys at West Epoxy on speed dial. Their tech support guys were great. And so with a lot of different advice and suggestions and guidance from a lot of people in the industry or people maybe not in the industry but who had experience, we put together the boat. And I'll tell you what, it's stiffer than hell. If you hit my stringers with a hammer, it sounds like a steel drum. And then we glued and screwed and tabbed all the floorboards back. We glued, screwed, and tabbed the settee burst back. So if you ever have to take that thing apart, you're going to need dynamite or a jackhammer.
if a boat is a hole in the wall or hole in the water where you throw money, how much money have you spent on the current 40? And how much bigger of a boat if you could have taken all that money and bought a new boat or even a newer one? I've often wondered that formula. It would be interesting to figure out.
I don't know the exact amount of money. That's something I don't really want to know. But I can tell you this, materials aren't cheap, but by having learned and continuing to acquire the skill set to do this stuff myself, B, have some, crew member that will step up and help with their skill sets. I've probably, if I had to pay somebody to do this, it'd probably be over $100,000, but I've got, a small fraction of that, and all that cost is in materials. But like when we did the stringers, it was me, Brett Zimmerman, Art Lavasser, and Peter Wensler. All right, we're like the four main guys, and there was another 5 or 6 people on the crew that came in and helped out, for that project. So once we got that all done, the boat was a lot stiffer. I could put more backstay on. The boat didn't bend like a banana, and it performed better. And then, with all the skill set I learned from that, I had some squishy spots in the deck and the cockpit soil. That's all been recored. We broke a mast a few years ago. The insurance company replaced that, so I didn't technically do that repair, but set up a new mast. We managed to bend the rudder a couple of years ago in Mackinac, and again, the insurance company paid for that, so I didn't do that repair myself. But I've also replaced the remaining. There's a total of 12 stringers in that boat, and all 12 of them. I'm sorry. 11 of the 12 have been replaced. The one under the engine has not been. If I ever pull the engine to rebuild it, which I might, then I'll get to that stringer, but it doesn't really need it.
When you went over at 105 or somewhere in the velocity of a lot of wind, there was no boat damage? There wasn't any great boat damage during that time?
Well, 4 stringers. I mean, keep in mind. So I don't know if you know who Big Ted is, but Big Ted is named Ted, and he's big. That's what we call Big Ted. He's strong. He was in his late 60s at the time. I think he's in his early 70s now. The dude is strong. Okay.
Right.
And he was literally trimming the main just to keep the leach out of the water, so we didn't, so the main didn't fill up with water. We were going sideways at 9 knots, 1 degree off course to the next mark. So we were totally out of control, but just being forced. We had 2 kids, under the age of 18, and we tossed them down below, Griffin Sherry and Tyler Venz. And we just said, stay away from the mast, so if it breaks, you don't get decapitated by the mast butt. And we just stood there, and the boat just vibrated like crazy. The backstay came loose, not loose, but the little, the little ring that holds the hydraulic juice in there got rolled and it let out. So I was going to have to put that back on. It was crazy. So other than torn head sails and the cracked springers from all the flogging around, there was no other damage. We were quite lucky that there were no other boats in the area, because had we had to avoid something, we would not have been able to. Had someone gone overboard, we weren't going back to them until that storm stopped, So we were very lucky to avoid anything worse than what we had.
Do you think most folks that sail have a clue on how to fix their boats? Or is it more 20% of the racing community knows and the other 80% think they know?
I don't know if it's I'd be a little more generous and say like 40% know what they're doing and 60% don't, or maybe a lot. Pretty much everybody who sails does their own bottom because they don't want anybody else touching it. Because, so I mean, I would say that in the sailing community, the racing sailors are probably much more prone to be do-it-yourselfers. Because it's their boat, it's their baby, they're competitive, it's their pride and joy. They want to do everything they can to get the last 1,000th of a knot out of it. And so they're going to take the time to sand that extra little dimple off the port side of the rudder, okay? If you're paying somebody to do it, they're on the clock, not that paid guys are bad at all. I'm not at all implying that, but they're not going to have the same love and an emotional investment in your boat as you are. So, there's different levels. I don't know too many people that would replace all the stringers in their boat, but, moderation is not really a thing with me. So, to me, it's normal. But there's plenty of guys I know that do all sorts of stuff themselves that maybe cruising sailors wouldn't do, or newbies to sailing wouldn't do.
We did last year, we kept track of what we thought was going to be. We thought we'd take a year out and look at all the finances for the boat. And last year was a year that we ended up buying new sails. And I got to a figure, doesn't matter, but it was a lot of money for us. And I stopped keeping track because I just didn't want to know the size of that number. And in a lot of cases, you do the work yourself. We've done a lot of work on the inside of the boat, but then we get to the mechanical part of it. And I think a lot of people like me can look at YouTube videos. They really should hire it out, because in a lot of cases, sometimes they just don't, especially in cruisers, they just don't do the work the way it should be done, especially when you got something that's a boat that's 40 years old. I think that's kind of important. But at the same time, being in a sail club, Bayview like Crescent, you've got quite a bit of resource to be able to get answers. And I think that's the other part of that the community that really helps a ton as well. So, from that.
Well, if you look at the resources we have just here in Michigan, okay, so you've got, Gujan, West Systems for epoxy. Whenever I've called those guys up, they will spend as much time as you need talking you through it. They're really good. You've got offshore spars up in Chesterfield Township. So if you have master rigging questions, they're a great resource. You got Todd Jones at Thomas Hardware. He's a great resource. You've got all the local sail makers, and then there's, guys like me and guys, I do it for myself. If someone wanted to hire me, I would just tell them you can't afford me because I don't really want to do this for a living. But you got, Dean Kuhn and Dave Bennett and Mike Spiteri and, Kevin Thompson and a whole bunch of other guys that work on boats around here. So, if you need something done, it's not that you have to go to some nameless, faceless, big mega fixed corporation. There's a lot of local guys to do that, and a lot of guys will be happy to answer your questions.
It surprises me the folks that come from other areas too to utilize some of the experts that are here. I know that having conversations that there's folks that, Cleveland has got lots of sailing folks in Chicago, but a lot of work gets done here for other areas in the Midwest because of the quality.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I think that's kind of part of that discussion. What do you think the biggest mistake low-level racers, and I say low-level, that's probably the wrong word. What do you think inexperienced racers and cruisers, what mistakes do you think they make in fixing their own boats? Not knowing is part of it. I get that, but
I've never really looked at it. Some people, conversations that maybe I've overheard, people tend to focus more on the cosmetic sort of thing, and that is not high in my skill set. Like, if you look at my hull closely, it could have a better paint job on it. It's not that important to me because it doesn't affect performance, and from 10 feet away, it looks fine. But I would guess that the single biggest, error that people would make is if they're doing fiberglass work, they don't properly prepare the working surface and they don't wet out the fiberglass enough. And there again, I didn't just wake up knowing how to do that. I talked to the guys at West Marine, So I guess the correct answer to your question is the biggest mistake is they don't take advantage of all the resources they have and develop a full set of knowledge before tackling a job.
I come out of the ski world as a coach, and bottom of the ski, it matters more than the top, obviously, because it's got to go fast. I got moved to a slip last year at Crescent towards the end next to John McAllister, who's a very good Cal 25 sailor. John's been around a long time. And I'm meticulous about the way my boat looks, maybe more the top and the insides and the bottoms. And John he dives in our harbor when he's not supposed to from time to time. And if you look at his bottom, you could eat off of it. And if you look at the top of his boat, it looks like it was Second World War. And so you see that from somebody who's that meticulous in particular about what they do. You kind of want to do it. So this year we've decided to strip it right down to the gel coat and kind of start over. And it sort of feeds off itself when you see other people wanting to do it correctly, because sometimes a lot of us just don't know. You buy a gallon of paint and you slap it on and away you go. So there's more to it than that. And I think sometimes you have to pay attention to the rules, but that is what it is.
No, I understand that completely. I've got a guy that sails with me, a young guy by the name of John Mitchell, and John came to me a few years ago, and I'm not even sure how he originally ended up on the boat, but young kid, wanted to race, and had some sailing experience, very little racing experience, but he was a good learner. Never had to tell him anything 3 times. Rarely had to tell him anything twice. Always asked good questions at an appropriate time. But here's what sealed the deal for this guy. It was springtime. We were talking about the racing schedule, and he said, "Hey, I want to do all the big races. I want to do the Mackinac stuff." And I said, "Okay, well, let me see who's doing what, and see if we got a spot for you." He looked at me and he said, "There's something about me you might not know. I'm a certified scuba diver and I have my own gear." I said, "Can you watch the bottom of the boat every Friday night or Saturday morning?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You're in." All right. And I tell him, especially towards the end of the season, he does more to contribute to boat speed than anybody else does. All right. Because he's down there making the bottom perfect.
I as again more cruiser than racer. Well, it's not a big deal. And then I was sent some stuff from U.S. Sailing last year because I run the junior sailing program at Crescent now, and I was sent some information. It was really surprising how much difference the bottom preparation makes. You know that, but for somebody that doesn't really think of it that way, and it was like, wow, it's a huge difference, especially if you're racing. And it doesn't seem like a second here and a second there matters. But I come out of a sport where hundreds of seconds can mean the difference between first place and third place. So, and a tenth of a second in skiing is a blink, and you can drop some spots. So it does matter. It does matter.
I lost a first overall in a Chicago Mac on a race one year by 4 seconds. 4 seconds, right? I needed therapy for like 3 months, all right? That was what? But going back to the bottom, so even if you're cruising, so if you're sailing from, say, I don't know, Killarney to Tobermory, and you got moss growing on your bottom, it's going to take you longer to get there than if you got a clean bottom. So
right.
It isn't necessarily a racing sailboat thing to have a clean bottom. Whether it's fair or not is another story, but at least cleaning the crud off it periodically will improve your sailing efficiency no matter what sort of sailing you're doing.
Now that's switching subjects, but kind of the same topic. You said your boat's in the water at the moment. Are you at Bayview with your boat?
Yes.
So the harbor is open, or is it just open to you at this point?
Well, if someone were able to get their boat in the water, the harbor's not closed. We have no staff. We have no clubhouse. We're completely shut down. But we have gin pools and small boat lifts and whatnot. So the letter that came out says some of the fact that, hey, if you want to go down and work on your boats and maintain proper social distancing, have at it. There's no staff in there to help you out. Again, I was uncharacteristically early. I didn't break anything last year, so all I had to do this year was a bottom job. I didn't take on any winter projects because I decided to work at my house this winter. And so the boat got in before everything got shut down with the executive order. And
no, go ahead.
And then the mast went up. It takes 3 people to put my rig up, and one's a button pusher, and one's inside the boat, one's outside the boat, and we got the rig in, and it's all dock tuned, and electronics are hooked up, and deck hardware's on, and it's ready to go. Now it just needs to stop snowing and warm up.
Now, when you have to sail, the rule let's. I'm really curious about this. State says you can't be a power boat. You can't go out with your power boat. So is a sailboat with an engine a power boat or sailboat?
Well, I'll tell you what. So one of my longtime crew member is an attorney and doesn't like being told what to do. So he went through the whole thing, all right? And what he pointed out is the executive order is what matters. All the things that they say in the FAQ section are meaningless. It's not written what's in the order, all right? So his opinion is sailing is acknowledged by the order as being a physical activity, okay? If you're going to engage in a physical activity, let's say driving to a park to go hike, all right, you're driving, you're using a motor to transport. So his view is you can use your motor to get in and out of the well to transport you to your physical activity. As far as landing, I've done that. I can do it. But he said, you're over 60. You're considered elderly. Bring somebody along to be a caretaker. Right? So I can do that. If you divided by 6 feet, that gives you 36.6. So I can have myself and another 5.6 people on the boat as long as we maintain proper social distance. All right.
Okay.
So that's his interpretation. If I go sailing, which I will as soon as the weather, I'll probably go out with 2 people, double-hand it, and see what happens.
Yeah. Even at Crescent, our harbor's closed at this point. They don't want any boats in there, and that's the way that's going to be until the rules change. We're all hoping May 1st. But as you point out, I think I'm not mistaken, you're single. So basically right now you have to be from the household to be able to get on the boat. So right. if you bring a medical assistant along, that covers the rule. So exactly. You can take somebody else. I could argue that I have a malt deficiency, so that I need somebody to be a beer carrier. So that all works out. I guess depends on how you read the rules. I'm wearing one of last year's Bayview hats from the race. Do you think, as a former Commodore at Bayview, do you think this is something that'll come off this year?
Um, I know Baby's official position is if we can legally run the race, we will. Okay, so we're planning on running it. I'm not involved in the Mackinac Race Authority nor in the committee. I mean, I talk to people, and obviously we're in a pandemic state of mind, so I don't know what the final outcome is going to be, but it could be anything from running the race as it always has been, assuming Mackinac Island is open and we have all the resources that we've always had access to. Or it could be something or the state says, no, you can't run the race and that's it, which would be a horrible, horrible tragedy. Or, maybe we run the race and we have a finishing crew there and we don't have a party. Maybe you take your boat to Mackinac City or Chicago or, Sheboygan or St. Ignace or whatever else because there's no party.
In the title, it says the continuously run race, meaning year after year after year, annual. Does that,
Correct.
If it's not run, even if it's two boats, if it's not run, does that hurt the marketing of the race? I can't imagine that hurt the marketing of the race, but I'm not sitting in a position where, like you're in terms of being Bayview's former Commodore. Is it that important to make sure this race is run? From an advertising standpoint? From an advertising standpoint, they make a point of this. This is the longest continual run freshwater long distance race in the world. Mm-hmm. If you lose the continuous in the word, is that critical? Is it vital?
I don't think it matters. The one and only reason it wouldn't be continuous is because we had a pandemic and the government ordered us not to.
Right.
So,
but I'm saying from a marketing standpoint, how can it matter? I just keep hearing conversations that's really important that we do that.
Well, it's important, but it goes away because of a government mandated shutdown due to a worldwide pandemic. I mean, what are you going to do about it? No one's going to be critical and say, "What? You guys didn't run your race that year?" And so I don't think
with everything that pivots around the Mackinac, closing a junior sailing and everything else, you see it being moved by date, or do you think it's either run or it's not run?
There's so much, everyone's summer, with all sorts of activities, is all booked up. And I know, like, for example, the Mills Trophy race is postponed. And if they are able to reschedule it, they're going to have a real tough time finding a weekend that A, Put and Bay can accommodate them, and B, that's suitable for all the racers. So I don't know.
Now, am I correct? The Bayview one design that would usually ran in May has already been canceled. Is that correct?
Pardon me?
The Bayview one design has been canceled already?
I don't know that it's been officially canceled, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. I haven't seen that it's been officially canceled, but I do know that they sent a note out saying, please register, send your money in, blah, blah, blah. If it's canceled, you get a full refund.
Okay. And I guess my last question is, we're sailing, we're competitive, we're trying to bring more people to boats. We have a bit of a finite group looking at the love of sport of sailing in terms of its audience. How do we bring more people to sailing, and how do we keep them there? Or is it just an old man sport that's going to die eventually because there's not coming behind us?
Well, getting people involved in sailing seems to be getting more and more difficult. People have less free time now, it seems. They have more choices in how to spend their discretionary time and their discretionary income. And then the world is much smaller, so maybe local kids who take junior sailing, they go to school and they get out of school and they settle someplace that is in southeastern Michigan, and so we lose them, all right? So I know that Bayview and Crescent, and I think some of the other clubs do some sort of, off the dock race and or hitchhiker program that invites people that want to, who are sailing curious, come out and check it out. And then when you and I talked on the phone a couple of days ago, I talked about this Detroit Community Sailing Center, and I don't know if you got a hold of Harry Jones or not, but so Harry Jones ran the Challenge to Win youth sailing program, and he basically got kids from the city of Detroit, kids who wouldn't normally have a traditional path towards the water, whether it's sailing, powerboating, canoeing, kayaking, whatever. Okay.
Talk about the foundation. Talk about the community foundation a little bit.
So that was the Challenge to Youth thing. And then when the Edison Boat Club lost their physical clubhouse last year, the Challenge to Win program joined with what was the Edison Boat Club Adult Learner Sail program. They now have space at the Detroit Boat Club in Belle Isle, and they have formed what they call the Detroit Community Sailing Center. And the goal is to offer both youth and adult sailing, to anybody that wants to do it. And right now we're in, obviously with the pandemic, we're slowed down on fundraising and grant application and that sort of thing. But we're working with U.S. Sailing, who's got a number of different programs to support community sailing. Harry has done a lot of talking with and networking with various city of Detroit officials who he tells me have all been very supportive. And right now everything's on hold because we have a little pandemic crisis going on. But I expect that that's going to do a lot to introduce a whole new crowd of people to sailing, and hopefully within that subset we'll get some people interested in sailboat racing. Bayview's got a fleet of small boats. Detroit Yacht Club does. I think Crescent has a ton of them. And I think to get the newer people, younger people involved in sailing, the boat's got to be a little more physical, a little more fun. I mean, you're starting to see more and more affordable foiling boats out there, and you have to have races that don't take all day on Saturday. You have to be able to go out, on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night, and spend an hour or two, get some exciting racing in, put it away, and go on with your week. So for example, I'm also involved with DRYA. Okay, so the DRYA runs the regattas that the member clubs host. Some of those regattas are windward lured, which are typically preferred by maybe the more hardcore racers. And I'm really generalizing here, so I don't mean to offend anybody. And the point-to-point races are maybe the hardcore guys do those too, because that's the race of the day. But they also attract maybe the less experienced or the less hardcore, because it's easier, and the skill set required for a point-to-point race is different than smashing a boat around the buoys all day long. So in order to make more effective use of DRYA's resources and to try and make it more fun, this year we are combining the A and the C course for the windward lured regattas. So all the boats will be on one course. We're blending or combining starts. There's going to be a total of 6 starts, and the goal is to get a minimum of 3 races in per day. We've also bought 2 of the robotic marks called MarkSet bots, which were actually developed by a couple of guys out of Crescent. You've probably seen them in the Crescent Harbor. So we're taking some steps to improve the quality of our racing product. All right, and by combining the courses, we need fewer race committee personnel. We need fewer race committee boats, so it eases up some of the burden of the resources that are required. And we're hopeful that should we actually have a sailing season this year, that it's a racing success.
In your mind, is DYRA effective?
It is, but it's a weird organization in the sense that it's kind of an organization of clubs, and we have to manage the clubs' events in terms of running them for them. And so sometimes, at many of the clubs, the race chair is a different person from year to year to year. The DRYA has a different bridge from year to year to year. And you've got a core group of volunteers at DRYA that are kind of, I don't want to say institutional, but they've got some continuity, and most of the clubs have the same sort of deal. So sometimes just getting the left hand and the right hand to be on the same page. So we could be more effective. Like the changes I just described are an effort to improve our effectiveness and our product. But keep in mind, we're kind of like herding cats with 12 different yacht clubs events to manage throughout the year. So we're working on it.
I was a committee member, used my boat for a committee for DYRA's committee race, and I was surprised at the age of the volunteers that were on the boat that were acting as the race committee. Some of them were, I'm 65, and I'm fairly sure they could have been my parents. And I don't mean that to be disparaging. I'm just saying that, I think volunteers of any organization are hard to find. But one of the things that, and maybe that's something you can facilitate, we have wanted to do just a simple sit-down conversation with Barb and with Tom Vickers, who's the Commodore, and not talk about the politics of what DYRA is. It's just the absolute working mechanical part of DYRA, what to expect, what to do. I have tried on a couple of occasions to get the right rating for my boat, things of that nature, and Barb is immensely helpful. But I think part of the DYRA's issue, at least, and again, I'm looking from the outside in, is just knowledge of the organization itself. And I think the website provides some of that, but I think that if there were a little more public relations oriented, and again, I'm pontificating, but I think they would help themselves if people knew more about what they do. Is that a fair criticism?
No, I mean, part of that is you got to kind of have to do a little bit of your own homework. So, for example, applying for a boat rating. Okay, so DOA has this thing called Section 15 that has an excruciating detail everything you need to do. All right. So if you don't do that, if you miss some of that or you do it wrong, you're going to get told you missed that or you did it wrong. So there's some level of self-sufficiency you have to have. But at the same time, if you call, Chuck Drummond or one of the other members of the Handicap Review Board and say, "Hey, I'm new to this. I have a question." They're gonna help you get through it. Okay. But it can be intimidating if it's something that is new or unfamiliar to you. Okay. As far as like calling Barb's great. She does a fabulous job. She can only work with the information she has. So if DRYA and you want to ask about the ABC Yacht Club's regatta and they haven't provided instructions, you can't answer. All right. And as much as we don't like to say, "Hey, call the guy at the ABC Yacht Club," sometimes we have to because he's got the answer and we don't. So can we communicate better? Yes. We discuss this and are we working on it? Yes. So I think that if you look at how we communicate and the level of effectiveness from even 5 years ago, it's certainly gotten better with the ways it goes.
Well, and I asked the question again, being new to Crescent. I have a collegiate lacrosse background as a coach. I was asked and I volunteered to take over a junior sailing program, and I looked at it from coaching other sports outside looking in. And we've made a lot of changes, not only to DYR junior sailing, but a lot of changes to what we're doing at Crescent, because it was, junior sailing was a certain way. But I'll give you the smallest example. It's that you're racing 75% of the time and practicing 25% of the time. Well, the truth of the matter is, you need to practice more than you race. And so that was kind of we have less days to race this year. Some of the regattas have been cut back so that we have more time to have practice. So the kids have that opportunity, which goes back to the same kind of point. And it's just communication. I think that's the one thing that I think any organization helps themselves with by being better at.
Yeah, absolutely. We've the DOA webpage, which is kind of old school looking at best. All right, this is the process of being revamped right now, so we're hoping to freshen that up. Also in the last few years, we've made more effective use of social media. I don't know if you know who Ben Wixon is, but he runs that Lake St. Clair Sailors Facebook page.
Yep.
And which his page is, he's got pretty much all the people in DRYA and that race and all that stuff, they're there. But there's also a whole bunch of people that sail that don't race, that might not belong to a private club, and they're there too. So as a way to facilitate meeting and conversation with a broader sailing audience here locally, that's been great. So, I think the improvements in the ways we communicate in the past few years have also helped us. So, the biggest problem is time. Nobody seems to have time.
And we started this little YouTube thing to talk to locals about the sort of inside baseball. Let's give some information that maybe some folks that are trying to get information don't have it. Throw a few fun conversations in with some icons of sailing, and talk to folks that are experts in the business. And if you're an expert, you get a chance to listen to guys talk expertly about whatever subject it is we're talking about. At the same time, if you're just learning, you might be able to pick something up and be a little, and that's why I think long form interviews give that opportunity, because you get that chance to have a discussion about a sport that we both love and participate from two different levels. And I think that's something that, as it grows, I think it'll take care of itself. And then if we can't communicate, what's the point,
No, that, and I just want to say right here, I appreciate being categorized as a icon when you just interviewed Dennis Conner. That man is an icon. I'm just a guy from the Midwest who likes to race sailboats, you know?
I got to tell you, just a really quick story. I talked to him. He didn't want to go on the air.
I bet he's never heard of me.
What's that?
I bet Dennis Conner has never heard of me either.
But I will tell you that when I talked to Eisler and I talked to Jobson, when I talked to Eisler, he knew Wally Jones or Wally Cross, and knew a lot of folks from here, which sort of surprised me. But you know, that's a cool thing. Gary Jobson got to talk quite. I didn't realize that Gary Jobson had started the leukemia conversations. The Leukemia Foundation sailing we do was started by Gary Jobson years ago. And he's been around it, so we had a chance to talk to Gary about Mike Williams being a local guy who was real involved in that process. But yesterday, at about the 25-minute mark, a couple days ago, I guess this is Wednesday, so this would have been Monday, I talked to Mr. Conner. He had this whole long conversation, got to the 24.5-minute mark. Somebody was at his front door. He lives literally across the street from the San Diego Yacht Club. So, I got to go. Hangs up. 10 minutes later, he calls me back. They wanted to make sure that I wasn't I got the information I needed, and it was just. And so we ended up talking for about 25 more minutes. I asked him a bunch of questions, nothing related to the interview. And then the next day, he sent me a little note saying he hopes everything worked out really well. Now, I lived in San Diego. I know the guy by reputation. You do as well. And I was astounded that he would take the time to answer questions back. And at one point, we were talking about thistles. And he said he had sailed thistles and had been very successful, but he was really cool. He made a comment that, I said something about having a big thistle event group, a lot of boats at Crescent, and he was kind of complimentary, saying that, it's a tough boat to sail and that there's a lot of good sailors that come out from the Midwest. I was just really surprised that he would take the time to have that conversation in reverse and call back to make sure everything had kind of changed my view of Dennis Conner. Yeah, he's an icon. So my last comment, my last conversation with you, my last question to you is, paint, from what you know of the pandemic at the moment, tell me what you think the summer, what do you think June, July, and August brings?
I'm not a doctor. I don't pay attention to all the people on Facebook who are all, pandemic experts all of a sudden. I do have people I personally know in the medical field, and I think that we're not going to have any sailboat racing in May. I think that the first part of June is going to be iffy. I think the latter part of June, July, and August will see some sailboat racing. I think events like the Chicago and the Bayview Mackinac will happen if at all possible, but they'll be stripped down. So there may be a race. There may not be a formal big party on the island afterwards. And not necessarily because nobody wants to have that or because we're not allowed to have that, but because the resources that are required to make all that happen on the island may not be available. I mean, there's a lot of people hurting right now because they're not working, and recovering from that isn't going to happen overnight. So,
last question.
I don't know.
Last question. Can you open a harbor using social distancing and not open a clubhouse to that club and still have a harbor open and just using the physical grounds? Is that something you see happening?
Well, yeah. But again, every yacht club board, one of the things you have to worry about is liability. So if they say, hey, if we open up our club to a member and two guys start talking and one gets COVID and dies, we're going to get sued. All right. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in. Personally, I see what's happening now is all of us are being restricted due to the fact that some people prove themselves incapable of basic safe social distancing practices, and so we're all being lumped in together like that. And I don't like it. I kind of sort of understand why. Still don't like it. But I don't see a problem with a fisherman or a kayaker or a jet skier or a powerboater or a sailboater getting their boat in the harbor, maintaining proper social distance, sailing with themselves or members of their household or their caretakers, and using common sense. The problem with common sense is it's not as common as it needs to be, and that's kind of why we're in the situation we're in. But if I'm going to take my last name and be the prophet, and use the crystal ball, I'm going to opine that we're going to have some sense of normalcy in sailing in all our lives, in the mid-July, late July timeframe.
Cool. We'll leave that as the last word. And I wanted to thank you for coming aboard and having this conversation. I think it was enlightening. And let's hope we have a great summer, and hopefully our paths will cross. And if not, you have a great summer. And Tim, thanks so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you. Thanks for considering me worthy of talking to, and I'm sure we'll see each other on the water.
Okay, man. Have a great summer.